Dr. Scott Sherr, one of the things I like to do on this channel is dive into things that have the most promise. The people that watch this channel or listen to this channel are usually very smart people that are interested in what's up and coming. Not always just what do we know retroactively over the last 10 years, but things that we're saying like, hey, this is what the literature is, and like this is where things are going. So I like to look at things that are super cutting edge, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
And you and I were talking before we started filming about one particular, I guess you could call it a supplement, but really more of just a compound. I'll let you kind of...
It's a neurotransmitter.
Neurotransmitter.
Yeah.
And let's just dive right in, like the benefits of this, where it could be applied, who could utilize it, how we become depleted in it. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, let's rock. So we were talking about GABA. So GABA is a neurotransmitter. And most people have heard of the superstar neurotransmitters, I like to call them. I've heard of dopamine and epinephrine and serotonin. If you're across the pond, it's noradrenaline and then adrenaline, but same thing as epinephrine and norepinephrine. Those are extremely important, but 80% of your neurotransmission has nothing to do with those neurotransmitters at all. It's a balance between two. It's a balance between one called glutamate and one called GABA. And glutamate actually turns into GABA in the brain. So GABA is not made really anywhere else except for a very small amount in the pancreas. That's a side note, but mostly all of your GABA is made in the brain. And GABA is responsible for 20% of your brain's neurotransmission. 60% is glutamate, so that's a total of 80%. So glutamate is your excitatory neurotransmitter. This is the one that makes you feel up. It makes you feel awake and ready. And norepinephrine, of course, plays a role in here, but general day-to-day, glutamate is more important. GABA is your neurotransmitter that's responsible for relaxation, for making the brain relax, allowing the brain to relax. So you need to have the balance between these two neurotransmitters to be able to get excited and also to relax and to recover. If you don't have enough GABA around, you're going to feel irritable. You're going to feel potentially a lot of different symptoms. And so some of those symptoms might be, so it's called GABA deficiency syndrome. And this is a lot of things. It could be things like depression, anxiety, stress, poor sleep. It could even be severe things like tremors and difficulty urinating and difficulty with your emotions and lability with your mood going up and down. It can also be, as a result of all this, you can have, of course, this can happen from a lot of different things. It's not just because of GABA, but people forget that GABA could be one of those neurotransmitters that is depleted because all of us are so stressed all the time, depleting our stress neurotransmitters, depleting glutamate, and not recovering enough to be able to get enough GABA in the system.
So, okay, with that, how does one deplete glutamate? Because that's probably what everyone's wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, this sounds like me, right? Everyone's probably thinking that.
Yeah.
And honestly, it sounds like me, right? It sounds like, okay, I'm like overtrained, maybe overworked, not sleeping well, running hot. And there's the obvious things like, okay, I'm depleting it probably just from life.
Right.
But how does one go about depleting it? And more importantly, how does one replete it? Now, I'm pretty stoked to announce too that for the last couple of years, I have been working with Thrive Market on creating my own product with them. And we decided a couple years back that a good nut butter would be the perfect product to team up on. So my nut butter has officially launched. So there's a couple of different ones. There's a macadamia nut, there's a cinnamon Brazil nut, which is sweet and tastes amazing, that's sweetened with allulose. And there's a chocolate hazelnut flavor, which is amazing. And they're going to abide by my rules too. There's a few different nuts in them, and then there's some allulose, and there's some salt. There's no fillers, there's no weird stuff. And the cool thing is if you get them through Thrive Market using that link down below, you'll save 30% off your entire grocery order, which also includes my nut butters. Plus you get a $60 free gift when you use that link. So you use that link down below, and then you can find the nut butters there on the website, and you can try whatever different flavor you want. I highly recommend you check them out. I created them in tandem with Thrive Market, so what you're getting is literally what I formulated and what I made. So definitely check them out. And if you're already a Thrive Market member, I'll put a link down below in the description that's specifically for a Thrive Market member that goes directly to that page as well.
Right. So depletion happens because of stress, typically. So if we have infection, we deplete glutamate. If we have stress in the system, we deplete it as well. We deplete GABA, So we deplete GABA as a result of stress, of multiple things. But I think, before I get there, I think it'd be helpful. So glutamate is made from glutamine. So glutamine is an amino acid. It's an amino acid that's very well known to most people in the bodybuilding performance world. Is not something that's very well appreciated, I think, as we were talking about before we got on. But glutamine is the fuel for the colon cells itself, but glutamine gets converted in the body to glutamate in the brain. And so if you're deficient in glutamine, you're not going to make enough glutamate for your brain. And if you can't make enough glutamate, then you can't make enough GABA. And then if you can't make enough GABA, you can't relax the firing of your brain.
So in that case, who becomes deficient in glutamine?
Lots of different people will become deficient. Of course, if you are not getting enough protein in your diet, if you're not getting sources of protein from glutamine that has glutamine in them. So meat is going to be your biggest source here. Typically people that are vegan or vegetarian are going to have a much harder time getting enough glutamine in their diet. If you are a elite athlete and you are always training, you're also probably going to have a leaky gut, and your gut is going to be sucking up all your glutamine in your gut itself to try to help fuel it. Not a lot's going to get into your brain to make glutamate, and then very little is going to get over to GABA, so you're going to be GABA deficient. You're not going to sleep well, you're going to feel irritable all the time, you're going to have stress, you're going to feel anxious, you're going to feel depressed, and like this is something that a lot of athletes will complain about if they're overtraining.
I mean, it sounds like it's a vicious cycle too.
Yes.
Like you become depleted in it, so then you don't sleep well. So then you become more depleted in, all these other things. You get depleted in GABA, and then you're trying to like fuel that system, and it's just like this spiral.
Yeah. And just to mention also, like, to convert from glutamate to GABA, you need magnesium, you need vitamin B6. So if you're deficient in magnesium or you're deficient in vitamin B6, you're not going to convert glutamate to GABA well, and that whole system is going to get mucked up, and you're going to have more glutamate. And the most common example of people that have glutamate is monosodium glutamate, or MSG, right? So if you go to a Chinese restaurant and the food's sweeter than you anticipated, and you immediately get a headache, that's because you have suddenly a huge preponderance of glutamate compared to GABA. And as a result of that, you have this headache that typically will happen as a result of that excitability that happens because of too much glutamate. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, no, I've used that reference a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes it really upsets people because I think that it's they like their MSG or whatever, and I'm not even saying it's good, bad, or ugly. It's just what it does, right?
Yeah,
it's
totally,
just like, and I've noticed personally, anecdotally, if I have MSG, I don't sleep for a couple days. Like, I mean, it's bad, right? Like, I know when I have MSG to the point where like I'm getting weird dreams and I'm waking up multiple times. So
right.
I'm very sensitive to it, and I'm very aware of it. And there's a lot of people I've seen even in the comment sections when I've done videos talking about that have very similar experiences.
Yeah, and so just building up the glutamate, right? And then you might have a harder time because you might be on the depleted side on the GABA to replenish your GABA fast enough. If you're depleted in vitamin B6 or magnesium, if you're highly stressed, if you have an infection, so we're talking about infection before, infection's also going to deplete everything too. It's going to be harder for you to maintain your GABA levels with all that going on too.
So if someone is, let's say they're restricting calories,
Yeah.
and they're having a hard time getting enough protein in to begin with, or maybe they're unaware of it, right? Because it just happens sometimes. Can glutamine supplementation help support this? Because there's a lot of controversy there. Because in the athletic world, glutamine has kind of been like, it's worthless. Don't bother with it, especially in the muscle building world, because it doesn't contribute to muscle protein synthesis hardly at all.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's just nope. Just eat your meat, whatever. So is there actually a practical application for taking a glutamine supplement in that case?
So my perspective here is that glutamine is a great fuel for your colonocytes or your colon cells. And so it's really important to fuel those with a good amount of glutamine. But the problem is if you use glutamine to replete GABA, you have a number of different steps along the way. So I don't typically go that route. I make sure they're getting good amounts of glutamine in their diet, but I probably wouldn't supplement with glutamine as my way of increasing GABA. I would likely be making sure they have vitamin B6, making sure they have magnesium, but then I'd find natural ways to improve GABA production. And there's a number of different ways to do that, both pharmacologically, or supplement-wise, and natural herbals and things like that, and fungals, even from a certain mushroom that I was mentioning before, or you can actually look at various ways to enhance your GABA production by things like meditation or breath work, which also do what we're kind of been dancing around here, is that balance your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, right? If you're always sympathetically dominant, you're going to deplete most everything, including GABA. So what you can do is you can enhance GABA production and the amount of GABA in there by becoming more parasympathetic. So by finding ways to relax, of course, by meditation, with breath work, with yoga. There's actually been studies on yoga increasing GABA in the brain. Exercise, to some degree, can actually increase GABA as well because it helps balance out the balance, the ratio between glutamate and GABA as well, if you're not overtraining as well. So, but from my perspective, I don't typically replete GABA by giving glutamine. I will give glutamine to people that are under high stress, that their gut's toxic, they have leaky gut, that they just had surgery, and they're just kind of, they need a lot more glutamine if that's the case to help maintain their gut lining. I'll also do it. One of the interesting tricks that you may not know about is that if you're young, if you're about 30 years or younger, and you can take glutamine for about 30 days, and it will seal up your gut. It's pretty well known that it'll do that, which if you have a leaky gut and if you can take glutamine at high doses for about 30 days, you can actually seal up your gut. So I'll use it for that reason. But if I'm looking at balancing out the GABA system, I'm looking at the cofactors, magnesium, B6, and I'm thinking about how I can give GABA directly, typically.
So without going into territory that we're not able to talk about on YouTube, let's call it an umbrella term of talking about sort of an adaptogenic effect.
Yeah, sure.
Right? How does that essentially work? So when I say adaptogens, things that help regulate those neurotransmitter functions, right? Like, I mean, common adaptogens, and it's not necessarily related to this topic, but ones that people know of. People have heard of ashwagandha, they've heard of rhodiola, things like that that are adaptogenic. And I know you mentioned, fungus and things like that.
Yeah.
What are some ways that people can influence GABA while still keeping it PG for the sake of YouTube?
Of course, PG. I like PG. So we have kids. We have to keep things PG. You know how it goes. So when it comes to GABA, you can think about GABA it has a receptor in the brain. It's called the GABA receptor. Shocking, right? And the GABA receptor, GABA can bind to the receptor itself and increase the amount of neurotransmission, related to GABA. So what that means is that actually when GABA binds to the receptor, it prevents the neuron that it bound to from firing. So that's what I mean by calming down the whole system from firing. So you can have GABA actually itself bind, or you can actually have other things bind what are called allosteric sites to the GABA receptor. That's a fancy word for meaning a different site on the GABA receptor can bind something, and then as a result of it binding that, if it's a positive allosteric modulator, what's going to happen is that it's going to positively affect GABA binding, and then GABA is going to bind more, and as a result of that, you can have less firing of that neuron because you have more GABA that's bound. So some of the most common things that we use from an herbal perspective are things like valerian root. Everybody's heard of valerian. Valerian is a positive allosteric modulator to the GABA receptor. You take you take valerian and it can help you sleep because valerian is very well known to help with relaxation and improve GABA. Another one that we know very well is kava. Kava actually binds to another allosteric site on the GABA receptor, and kava is from the kava root, kava plant from the South Pacific. Has been around for thousands of years for stress, for relaxation. It's enhancing the GABA system. We also have something called agarine. Agarine is it's a GABA agonist, which means that it actually binds to the GABA site itself. And this is really cool. Agarine's from the Amanita muscaria mushroom. So it's a mushroom that's gotten very famous from Alice in Wonderland and from mythology about Santa Claus and causing psychedelic experiences. But it has two molecules in there, in the mushroom. It has something called agarine and it has something called ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid is neurotoxic. That's what causes the psychedelic experiences. But this other one called agarine is a fantastic compound for sleep because it's a long-acting GABA agonist. It stays on the GABA receptor for a while. It increases GABA firing. So you have this 8 to 10 hours of a half-life. So you have a whole night where you can actually get good sleep using something like agarine as something to support the system along the way. There's other molecules and compounds too, but the key to also just mention is that there are some pharmaceuticals that are well known to have a very high affinity for the GABA receptor that you need to avoid. Things like benzodiazepines and alcohol and barbiturates, Quaaludes, if anybody's old enough to remember those. But those all actually bind to the GABA receptor as well. But the difference with those is that they're such a high affinity for the binding and they're pharmacologic that there's a high risk for tolerance, for withdrawal, for having bad side effects from those drugs. Naturally enhancing the GABA system with some of these other things has really shown to be very safe overall.
Interesting. So, and people might look at this and they say, okay, well, maybe from a performance aspect, and I ask this question, like, could this be counterproductive? Like almost like a sedative-like effect. And, your answer with that was pretty interesting. And it sounds like you can actually potentially improve performance by increasing that parasympathetic tone. I think a lot of us I'll use myself as an example. Like if I'm running hot, I have a hard time diaphragmatically breathing. I have a hard time, I think we've all experienced, when we go to the gym and it's like, why did my heart rate immediately just go to 140? It's just you just, boom, you start on the assault bike and you're there, right? Compared to this is a day when I can get this good breath. So it's not just something to maybe lull you to sleep. There's daytime applications, right? Yeah,
we all need GABA throughout the day as well, and because it's that balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. The key, as you know, is that when we work hard for recovery, we need to get as parasympathetic as fast as possible to be able to give our body the time to recover. So that's why the worst thing you can do at the gym, as you know, is if you do your hard lift and then you're on your phone like scrolling and doing this and like just sympathetically just going crazy, right? You need to be thinking about your breath and calming down. So if you have more GABA on board, you're going to be able to change over to parasympathetic faster, as opposed to taking longer to recover. So it's well known that this balance is hugely important for recovery. It's hugely important for performance as well. And of course, if you're taking something to enhance GABA system, you may want to take it at night because it may make you feel more relaxed. It may make you feel more tired. It may decrease stress. But you can also titrate the dosing. And you know, I have a company called Troscriptions that you know that has these things called troches that are titratable. So you can start off with a small amount, like a quarter, then a half, then a full, and then kind of figure out where your dose is. We have one particular compound that I forgot to mention called nicotinyl GABA, and this is a vitamin B3 attached to a GABA molecule. And what's nice about this is that, what I didn't mention is that GABA supplements don't work. If you take a GABA supplement over the counter, GABA itself is too big of a molecule to get across the blood-brain barrier on its own. So GABA supplements don't typically work unless you have a leaky gut, and that means you have a leaky brain. People get scared when I say leaky brain, but all I mean there is that you have a leaky gut. And so if people take GABA supplements and they're feeling much more calm and relaxed on them, it could mean that their gut is leaky and that their blood-brain barrier is not working as well. And so just to be aware of that, you know, if you're taking GABA supplements, they don't typically work. And that's why it's really important to find other things like the ones we've been talking about, your kava, your agarine, your valerianic acid, and then there's something called nicotinyl GABA that I was just mentioning that's attached to a vitamin B3. And when it's attached to a vitamin B3, it gets across it gets across the blood-brain barrier. And when it does that, you have amount of GABA in there, and you have some vitamin B3, which is actually nice because vitamin B3 is mildly activating, and so you don't feel too tired on it. So for people that want to take some GABA during the day but don't want to feel tired, this vitamin B3 attached to a GABA can be pretty cool. And we have a product called Trocalm at Troscriptions that has this vitamin B3 attached to a GABA. It has kava, and that can help relax you without making you feel like you're tired, because it has that vitamin B3 attached to the GABA molecule. And so you can take it during the day if you're feeling stressed, but you don't want to feel tired. And you can actually titrate your dose, a quarter, a half, or a full of our troche. It's called the buccal troche. It goes between upper cheek and gums and dissolves. And you can kind of figure out where that sweet spot is for you. So sometimes what I'll do, just take the edge off, is I'll just take a quarter. And then taking that edge off is just making your brain feel better, because we were talking about the sympathetic, parasympathetic balance. If you're sympathetically dominant, it's like being in front of a huge room of people and forgetting all your lines to your speech or to your whatever you're going to be performing. Your brain is so sympathetically dominant that you can't remember. But as soon as you take the edge off just a little bit, you can think again, you can speak, your words come out much faster and more fluid and all those kinds of things too. So it's really nice to have ways to modulate the GABA system without potentially making you feel tired along the way.
And the way that I could describe what you're like talking about is, like, have you ever been driving down the freeway and you're having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden you just whiz past a highway patrol and you're having a conversation and you look in the rearview mirror and you see that and sympathetic tone increases drastically because you like look down on the speedometer and you're like, you know,
yep,
you completely forget what you were talking about. And like, it's completely like everything just goes away real quick, right? And it takes you a minute to like come back from that. And I use that because everyone's kind of had that experience where you're just like, you're having that conversation, you're like, oh crap. And that's a perfect example of like what's happening sort of at like a, perhaps a more moderate rate, you know, or moderate example, I guess, you know, just everyday life when you're just kind of stressed. And then all it takes, you know, you're sitting at this level of sympathetic tone, all it takes is this much more to push you over that edge. It's like you're like kind of flirting with that zone all the time.
All the time, yeah. Like if your kid suddenly starts screaming, it's a good example too. Like if you have a kid and you're home, you're doing whatever, maybe you're cooking dinner, and all of a sudden you just hear like this blood-curdling scream, like everything just goes blank, right? Your mind goes blank, your sympathetic dominance goes way the up, and as a result of that, like your mind is like, you had no idea, like you're cooking, you forget everything that you were just doing. It's the same thing. So if you can take that edge off just a little bit, you can actually start thinking again, right? And obviously breathing is important and finding ways to learn how to de-stress yourself. But if you're in a pinch, it's nice to have kind of things along the way that can help you. And, you know, for sleep as well. I mean, we have a huge epidemic of people that can't sleep anymore, because I think it's about 20% of the US population has some sort of element of sleep-related disorder, and they can't fall asleep, they can't maintain sleep, or they wake up feeling not rested. And a lot of this I've found, at least in clinical practice, is that if you can optimize vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, that goes a long way. So your magnesium levels, your B6, but if you can give them a little bit of GABA along the way, and again, not GABA supplementation, maybe some of these other these other compounds that we've been mentioning, we have something called Tro-Z, which is for sleep at Troscriptions, and it's 8 ingredients, and almost all of them are working on the GABA system in various ways to help modulate it, to help improve it, to help balance it, so you have more GABA that can last you throughout the evening, so you can go to bed, you can maintain your sleep, and you can wake up feeling rested. And it's a fantastic formula, especially for people traveling, jet lag. If for me personally, I have a hard time with induction sometimes. That's usually your type A brain people, and like they just can't. Once I fall asleep, I'm good. So actually, I can use Tro-Calm for that because it just quiets my mind enough that I can fall asleep, as opposed to I have no trouble maintaining. But I have a lot of people that I work with that wake up in the middle of the night and they're just like looking at the wall, and their brain starts going on fire. And there's like a sympathetic spike. It might be cortisol actually that's doing this in a lot of people. But if you can actually have enough GABA in the system, so GABA helps you maintain sleep. So if you get these spikes, you won't wake up. Like, so for example, we're talking about like vivid dreams, for example. People will wake up in their dreams because they're so vivid, but GABA is helping you from not waking up during your dreams, because otherwise you'd be acting out your dreams in various ways, which would be uncool, as you know. So you want to have enough GABA in the system. And then of course there's serotonin. So you want to have enough serotonin. We have 5-HTP in that formula. We have a little bit of melatonin as well. There's some controversy on melatonin, but in general, melatonin is a fantastic way for sleep induction, helps you get to sleep. And also as we get older, we have less melatonin around to help us maintain sleep. So we think in some people that wake up in the middle of the night, there's a big melatonin dip, and that's one of the reasons why they wake up. So it's a pretty comprehensive sleep formula, but in essence, what we care about, is what I care about as a clinician, is like, what am I doing to fully optimize the system so that it can stay maintained over the long term, and hopefully get them off GABA supplementation, not GABA itself. We talked about that doesn't work, but things that enhance the GABA system. And that's what I try to do with all my patients. And my company, the Troscriptions company, we were founded initially as a nonprofit organization, training doctors and practitioners on how to optimize health. And so our goal really is to get people off of supplements, to get them off of things that are helping, that are exogenous, that you can, which I mean is that you're actually taking. Instead, you're actually supporting the system with good nutrition, good diet, sunlight exposure, light, water, magnetism, all that stuff, right? But on the path to optimizing health, we all need help along the way. And these are things that can be really, really helpful. So we can help you sleep now. We can help you with your anxiousness now, while you're on that path through truly trying to optimize your health over the long term.
I think it's like one of the things that people don't realize, like there's so many people, like I'm all for living as close to the earth as possible,
yes,
right? But it's also not always practical in today's world, because we're in climate controlled environments, we're in artificial light, we're in I don't think there's for example, say what you want about the guy, but like Dave Asprey takes all these different supplements, right? And I see people like raining on him. His argument is always pretty honest and pretty real. It's like, okay, if you want to have an honest approach to living close to the earth, then you need to be living out in the middle of nowhere in the actual woods, living close to the earth.
Homesteading.
Yeah, because it's the only actual way. So when you look at these things, like sometimes you do need that intervention to get you started. And I've been in situations where I've been in sympathetic overdrive for so long that you can't find your way out of it, right? And you're only going to do yourself so much by saying, okay, well, I'm going to eat a certain way. You're going to drive yourself crazy if you don't eventually have a little bit of intervention, whether it's supplemental or pharmaceutical or whatever it needs to be to break that cycle. And I think people need to be okay with that, knowing that, hey, maybe this isn't a permanent thing. And if it allows you to get from A to B to maybe to C to where you can actually start deploying those lifestyle interventions, then you can eventually move on.
It's so beautifully said, because I always talk about this with my patients. We need resets. We just, in life, the way it's led now with the stress and the environment, everything you just described, we just need resets sometimes to get us off a train that is going 100 miles an hour that we can't stop. And so sometimes these interventions are really important. And sleep is a big one for people. If people don't sleep, everything goes wrong. Their immune system is tanked, their mood is tanked, their relationships are tanked, their work is going to tank. And so if you can just reset their sleep, but also, what's cool about Tro-Z and the way we formulated this is it doesn't mess with your sleep architecture. So sleep architecture is your stages of sleep. You have your deep sleep, or you have your REM sleep and your non-REM sleep, right? Your non-REM sleep is your stages of sleep. There's 4 of those stages. 2 of the last stages are deep. And you have your REM sleep, which is your dreaming sleep, right? And what happens a lot of times is that if you take some of these pharmaceutical drugs, or you have something like, for example, it messes up the sleep architecture. So you don't get a lot of deep sleep on these drugs. And so in the short term, it might be okay because you're actually getting to bed somewhat, but it's actually ruining your sleep architecture. So you want to try to find things that are going to naturally support your sleep architecture. We have one ingredient in Trozy called cordycepin, and cordycepin is from the mushroom cordyceps. Everybody knows mushroom cordyceps now from the show The Last of Us on HBO. That takes and makes you a zombie. But cordycepin will not do that. It does it to ants, actually. So it's a real thing in ants. So this cordyceps mushroom will take over the brain of an ant and then take control of it and make it a zombie. And it's actually a thing. But cordycepin is a fantastic mushroom. It's the active form of the cordyceps mushroom that helps with deep, slow wave sleep. And it's well regarded in that capacity. It also has interesting potential capacity for immune system function, for insulin regulation. They're using it as an anti-cancer at high doses in studies. It's really interesting. But so you want to support your natural sleep as much as possible, and supporting your capacity to have all of those stages. So be careful what you take, because some things might get you to bed, but you might still have trashed sleep. And things like your benzodiazepines, for example, are examples of those.
Even alcohol is a perfect example.
Oh, absolutely, of course. How could I forget?
Common one, right?
Yeah, alcohol trashes your sleep. You get no deep sleep on it. Most people wake up after a couple hours and it trashes your immune system. And so alcohol definitely should be avoided for sleep, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if we circumnavigate kind of everything here, independent of even the Troscription stuff,
totally.
What places or things should people be putting in place to influence GABA as much as possible, just sort of as a end result of all this conversation? What are the takeaways that people can really deploy today?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind first is slow the down. Everybody's got to slow down a little bit, right? And because if you can find ways to become more parasympathetic, if you find ways to relax more, even if it's just for 5 minutes at a time, you are going to start improving your balance between this glutamate, the excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA. So that could be breath work, it could be yoga, it could be light stretching, it can be just getting out in the sunlight, actually. Just relaxing the body for a little while is going to improve your GABA capacity. Then you want to think about, are you giving yourself the building blocks that are going to make GABA, right? Are you getting good sources of vitamin B6 in your diet? Are you getting good sources of magnesium in your diet? I think when we were talking about before with people being on this freight train and just having so much stress and not being able to calm down, and they're trying so hard with their nutrients and their diet, but it's really hard to find. Most people are magnesium deficient. Most people, I think 80% of the US population, I might be slightly wrong there, but it's high. It has some sort of element of magnesium deficiency. And your vitamins and minerals, the foods that we're eating now, about 20 or 30% of the amount of nutrients that they used to have 50 years ago. So the nutrient depletion in our soil is real. So, but you still want to focus on nutrient-dense foods that are going to help support the system. So what are you thinking about? You're glutamine-containing foods. Talking about magnesium-containing foods, right? This is usually, meat is the easiest way to get this stuff. And organ meats and liver is going to be probably your best form of all this stuff, because it's going to be all activated and all ready for you, especially your B vitamins. So you want to be thinking about your diet, making sure you're getting good sources of glutamine. You want to think about your lifestyle, where you're trying as much to be as parasympathetic as possible, finding breaks in your day to try to relax and finding things that you like that are relaxing. So taking recovery days, taking phone holidays is a great one too, because we're always on our phones doing this and our minds are always racing, but that's also depleting your excitatory neurotransmitters, including glutamate, and you're also depleting GABA as well. So you want to be thinking about getting parasympathetic, working on your diet, working on your lifestyle, and then supporting it with things that are going to improve GABA. And these are things that we've been discussing already: your herbals, your fungals, your ways to help improve your sleep and your anxiousness throughout the day, that are just kind of supporting the whole system. But of course, you don't want to do anything in a vacuum. You want to try to be thinking about doing everything, but not everybody's ready to change their diet, change their lifestyle. So having some additional ways to calm the system down immediately is really helpful. And then hopefully, the way I think about things in clinical practice is that once people start feeling better, it's not so bad to have a recovery day. It's not so bad to have a little bit more GABA around. Maybe I want more of this. Maybe I can change my diet. Maybe I can change my lifestyle. Maybe I don't have to train 70 hours a week. Maybe I can train 30 and still make gains and still have a better balance as a result of that.
Yeah. And one more thing before we wrap this up that was very interesting. When you mentioned the phone sort of even depleting, taking the phone break, are there parallels between things that are taxing on our dopamine compared to GABA? Like, do they seem to operate in tandem, or things can specifically deplete GABA that aren't necessarily influenced by dopamine? I mean, it sounds like a lot of the things that are also depleting GABA are also these high dopaminergic kind of things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, because the amazing thing about GABA is that it is everywhere in the brain. Okay, it's widely distributed in all areas of the brain, but specifically, it has this one particular function in most locations. It's called an interneuron, I-N-T-E-R neuron, which means it's between neurons. So it's actually between a lot of these serotonergic and dopaminergic neurons and regulating the flow of information. So if you are massively taxing your dopamine system, you're also taxing your GABA system, because your GABA is trying to prevent the firing of all the stuff that you're looking at, like, oh God, I'm looking at the next cat video, and oh God, the next keto video, and whatever. Like, and GABA is trying to keep up, with you, because dopamine and serotonin and these neurons are being modulated by the GABA system. So GABA is so important for learning, for memory, for skill acquisition. And of course, what is really important for skill acquisition, but dopamine as well. But what GABA does, it actually tries to stop all the firing, and trying to regulate the information that's coming in so you actually can learn. And so if you're depleting dopamine, you're depleting GABA too, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's because what I've always heard is a calm brain is a fast brain.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like the idea is people like, caffeinate, go, 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 go. It's like sometimes it's just the opposite. It's like being able to calm, and it's like, when I work with the special forces operators a lot, this is exactly what they teach them, right? It's not about amping up. Like, you don't see a lot of marksmen going forward and like pounding caffeine, right? That's not how they want their brain to operate. And I think if we could all kind of take a lesson from that, right? It's like when you look at the things that make you feel good aren't always the things that are truly good for you. So it's like, you have this discussion, I have this discussion a lot with people. I say, well, like being on my phone calms me down, it's relaxing. And it's like, well, there's a difference between something that is pleasure-seeking behavior and what is genuinely relaxing, because I think we've lost touch.
They're dopamine deficient. That's the problem, that they're going for that dopamine hit to get to some sort of baseline that they're missing. I mean, I love the operators, because what we talk about in our company a lot is, and just personally in my practice, is relaxed control, right? Yeah. The idea is that you're in control of the situation, but you're relaxed into it, right? You're part of the situation, but you're not, because you're overstressed, you're not going to be operating at the highest level that you want to be. And so the deal with fully looking at a whole person is looking at, yes, we can give them supplementation, we can change their diet, but like, we have to change their psychology, and saying the psychology is this: we want to be in a relaxed control. We want to be free from suffering of anxiety and stress and depression, of course. But how do we do that? We have to start with the reversing of the psychology of what it means to be in those states, and start there, and then build from there. That's what we typically do.
I'm into that, man. Well, Scott, where can everyone find you, man?
So our company is called Troscriptions. It's the word prescription and troche in the opposite way. So troche and prescriptions together, Troscriptions. We make something called a buccal troche, and it dissolves between your upper cheek and gums, and dissolves over about 15 to 30 minutes. What's nice about that is that it goes directly into the brain circulation and hits you in about 15 to 30 minutes. So you get an initial feel in that time frame, and you don't have to go through digestion. When you digest things, it takes longer, and people have leaky guts, and it may not work as well. So you can get a buccal troche here, dissolve 15 to 30 minutes later, getting the effect. So the company is called Troscriptions. It's troscriptions.com. You can find us on Instagram at Troscriptions. And we have a number of different products. We have one for anxiousness and stress. It's called TroCalm. We have one for sleep. It's called TroZ. Shockingly, but go check it out. And we have a great amount of information on our website. I write most of the blogs myself with all the scientific information. We have a good jet lag protocol, for example. That's great. We have great information on all the ingredients in all of our products. And it's just a really fantastic company to be with, because our focus is to help people right now. But we have a nonprofit organization that's training doctors and practitioners on how to optimize health. And this is part of my own clinical practice, working telemedicine-wise with people all over the world, helping optimize their health over the long term, while we're helping them now with Troscriptions.
Right on, man. Well, as always, thank you, brother.
Thank you.